Hey, this is a lesson video about how to complete one of these annotation assignments for 10th grade English in Mrs. Hernandez's class. So what you're going to need to complete this assignment is these 3 pieces of paper. And I know it's a lot of pieces of paper, but I'd like to print them out and have them in front of you so you can move between the papers and move between the information. It's going to feel like it's switching a lot of papers at the beginning, but you're going to get really good at this and you're going to get more comfortable with it. You're also going to need 2 colors of highlighters and a pencil. If you struggle with your handwriting, this assignment's going to be hard for you because handwriting is going to make or break your assignment. So you're going to have to use, if you struggle with handwriting, use a mechanical pencil. I have some here for you to borrow as well. Use a mechanical pencil, it'll help you write more clearly and it'll help you write smaller so you can fit all the information on the page. So what an annotation assignment basically is, the word annotation is just a fancy word for taking notes. Annotation, the root word of the word annotation is notes, right? Notation, we're taking notes, right? But there's annotation, it's a special way of taking notes, right? So I'm going to teach you that special way of taking notes and how to do that thoroughly. But first, let's read the directions for this assignment. So what this assignment is just a piece of mice and men, and it's blown up big in big letters for you, but there's space in between each, so you have room to write in between the lines, you have room to write in the margins, you have room to annotate. You can also, if you have a copy of the book that you're keeping forever and not checking out from the school, you can also write notes in the book as well if you want, but in order to get credit for an annotation, you need to have it turned in on a piece of paper, just like this, okay? So let's see what the assignment's asking us to do. It's saying, read and annotate the following passage from chapter 1. This passage just happens to be the very first 2 paragraphs of the whole book. So we get to look at exactly how Steinbeck chose to introduce this whole entire novel. Then we need to identify and explain at least 3 literary devices. So that's 3, okay? So I need 3 literary devices, okay? And then I don't think that's all. It's saying that we also need to make 3 other annotations. 3 other annotations. So I need also 3 other annotations, right? Okay. So I know that I'm going to need 6 total annotations, okay? 3 literary devices and 3 other annotations. So this is going to help you. This green paper is going to tell you how to annotate, right? So this green paper up here, this part's a really important part. This will tell you how to annotate the literary devices, right? It'll tell you that you need at least 3 of those for every assignment, and it'll tell you step by step how to do an annotation for that literary device, okay? So it's telling us to first highlight the area that has a literary device, then write the code LD by any literary device that you're identifying, and then it's asking you to identify which literary device it is, and then it's asking us to explain why that text meets the definition of the literary device you identified. And then finally, these first 3 are kind of like junior high school type stuff. They're the low level thinking, those first 3. But this fourth one is where the higher level thinking, the high school thinking comes in, right? So the 4th one is asking us to explain how the author's use of that literary device enhances the text. And we can't just say things like, it paints a picture in the mind of the reader. That's boring, right? So we need to do this type of annotation for a literary device. We need to do this whole process, 1, 2, 3, 4. We need to do that at least 3 times on the page, at least 3. You can do it more than 1. If you're not sure on one of the literary devices you've identified, you can do an extra one just to be sure that you're getting all the credit if you want, but you need at least 3. Then, in addition to those 3 literary devices, we also need at least 3 of the other types of annotations. So the other types of annotations are a little more loosey-goosey, right? They're not so specific for those literary devices. They're a little more loosey-goosey, and it's just asking us to make observations about the text and try to start connecting our understanding. So you can find contrasts and contradictions within the text and then explain how those affect the text. you can find times when the author's repeating ideas or situations or words or even images. You can find a light bulb moment, anything in the text that made you realize something big, helped you understand something big. A prediction, you can say that a certain part of the text made you feel like you can predict what's going to happen next. You can wonder about things. Why did this happen? Why did the author put this here? Why did the author choose to discuss this idea in this way? And then a connection to another moment. It's hard in the first chapter because there's nothing before the first chapter to connect it with, but you can make connections to another moment in the text as you move through the text. You can also say that you can make connections to what you know about the author in his life as well, or about the time period or the Great Depression. You can even make connections to stuff you know about, like what we talked about in our context slide presentation, like the neurodivergencies that we talked about, or the use of slurs and why we don't do that anymore. You can also have a wild card where you can just find parts of the text that stand out to you in any way. In any way that anything that stands out to you, you would just follow the directions. So for each of these different types of annotations, you just follow these directions to make sure that you've completed the annotation correctly. And so for each of the literary device annotations, you just follow these directions to make sure you annotated it correctly. And in case you have forgotten the literary devices from when we had that lesson and watched the videos in class, I also have this paper that is a comprehensive list of the literary devices that you can choose from. So we've already learned about these in class. You've already filled out a definition sheet. But we'll talk about these as the blue sheet and the green sheet. So you should always have the blue sheet and the green sheet in front of you as you are completing an annotation assignment. And before we get started for this annotation assignment, it's important to notice how it's going to be graded. So there's going to be 1 grade for the way that you've annotated the literary devices. So what it's asking us to do is do the things really exactly, just insightfully do the things that it tells us to do in these 4 steps. And then here for the second part of the rubric, it's talking about the additional annotations. And basically you can get a 4 if you complete the steps next to whatever annotation you choose, if you complete those steps in an insightful and thorough way. Very similar to what we do with our journal entries. Okay, so I'm going to annotate this. I'm going to look for the literary devices first because I think that's harder. So I'm going to do the hard things first and manage my time in that way. So before we even start, I'm going to just read the first paragraph and see if I can notice any literary devices. For some people, identifying literary devices is going to be really hard, and for others, it's going to be easy. It just depends on how your brain is wired. But if you're the kind of person that it's difficult for or it's easy for, we gotta do it either way. We gotta train our brains to do it either way. So let's just read this first paragraph and see if we can find any literary devices. The thing that I do to find literary devices is I ask myself, is this literally happening, or is the author using figurative, non-literal language to describe what's going on here? Okay, so evening of a hot day started the little wind to moving among the leaves. The shade climbed up the hills toward the top. On the sandbanks, the rabbit sat as quietly as little gray sculptured stones. And then from the direction of the state highway came the sound of footsteps on a crisp sycamore leaves. The rabbits hurried noiselessly for cover. A stilted heron labored up into the air and pounded downriver. For a moment, the place was lifeless, and then 2 men emerged from the path and came into the opening by the green pool. Here's the thing. I don't even need to read on because I've already noticed a lot more than 3 literary devices, even in just these few sentences. So these just happen to be the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-ish sentences of the whole book itself. So in just the first 9 sentences of the book, I already counted 8 literary devices, but all we have to do is find 3. Okay? So the first literary device I noticed is when something non-literal is happening. So I look here and I see this line that says, the shade climbed up the hills toward the top. Now I know that literally shade is an inanimate object, so it can't climb. Climbing is a human quality, right? Shade can't climb. Shade can just shade is just subject to however the sun shines on an object, right? So it can't climb. So when I give an inanimate object a human-like quality, well, I am looking at personification. So when non-human things or inanimate objects are given human qualities or characteristics. So this second line in the book is personification, or in essence, I'm personifying shade. So I'm going to go to I've confirmed on my literary devices list that I am looking at personification. So then I'm going to move to my green sheet, and I'm going to look at my list of things that I need to do in order to get full credit on this annotation. So if I look here, the first thing I need to do is I need to highlight the text that contains the literary device. I did that. And then I need to write the code LD by it, okay? And then I can draw a line to connect the text with the code. Okay, that's helpful. So I'm going to take this highlight and I'm going to draw a line and an arrow to show where the annotation for that highlight actually is in the margin. Okay, so there's my arrow. And I've done number one, I've highlighted, and I'm going to put the code LD. That stands for literary device, okay? And then the second thing that it's asking me to do is identify which literary device is being used from the blue sheet. Well, I already did that because I'm super smart and I know that I found personification, okay? So then next, for this annotation, what it's asking me to do is explain why this text meets the definition of the selected literary device. So let me go back to the definition. The definition is when non-human things are given human-like qualities. Okay, so I would say, and I'm going to put, this is, for this annotation, I'm doing the third thing on the list here, the third thing on the list right here. So I'm going to put a little 3 down so Mrs. Hernandez knows that this is number 3 on that little list. And so now I'm going to put, for this little annotation here, I'm going to put shade is not human, but it is being given a human quality, which is climbing. So I've said why this text meets the definition of personification, but I'm not done with the annotation yet. Here's the hard part. Now remember, the easy part was just identifying the literary device and saying why it is that literary device, but here's the higher level thinking part. Here's the part that I'm going to have to stop and think about. It says, explain how the author's use of the literary device enhances the text and or the story. And I can't just say that it paints a picture in my mind of the shade. That's boring and that doesn't really answer the question. I need to say, how does the fact that Steinbeck used this personification, used this literary device, how does that make his writing better? How does that make it more impactful, more vivid, more beautiful? And how does it make it so I get more out of it? So I'm going to put a little 4 down because I know I'm doing number 4 on the annotation list. And I'm also going to put a little 1 up here because I know that this is my first of 3 annotations. Okay, so the shade climbed up the hills toward the top. Here's the thing. I know shade can't climb, and Steinbeck could have just said that the sun moved in the sky and the shade moved across the ground. That would have been easier, but instead he chose to use figurative language here, and I wonder why. And he also could have said that the shade crawled or scampered across the hills, but he didn't. It said it climbed. So this word climb is a little bit more positive and a little bit more, it just fits this idea of a bright, hot day with a little bit of wind and the shade climbing up the hills. For me, this is painting not just an image in my mind, but it's characterizing the whole entire setting. And we know that the setting is Steinbeck's Salinas Valley. And we know that the first 2 sentences of his whole book is describing this Salinas Valley. We know he grew up there. And we know that he loves that area, right? So the way that he's describing it and the way that he's saying the shade didn't just move, it climbed. It's almost as if he's trying to get us to believe that this Salinas Valley is magical, that it has an otherworldly quality about it, that it's a positive and an interesting and an alive place to be, right? So I would say this personification helps the writer kind of characterize the setting, which is the Salinas Valley, as appealing, positive, and even a bit magical. And then I'm going to put, this makes me think that Steinbeck wants the reader to have a positive connection to the setting. Now, this isn't the only right answer for saying what the impact is of this simile. It's not the only right answer. It's just my idea of it. So you would just use your imagination to come up with how does the use of that literary device enhance the text for you as a reader, okay? So I did the first one. Let's read on. On the sandbanks, the rabbits sat as quietly as little gray sculpted stones. Now here, we're not using figurative language, but I do know that he's describing the rabbits, and he's describing the rabbits using a comparison, and he's comparing these rabbits to little gray sculpted stones, like little gray figurines. So sculpted stones and rabbits are not alike things, but he's using a comparison of two unlike things to help me understand what the rabbits look like. So here's the thing. I think I'm using one of these two, a metaphor or a simile, because I know both of those are when the writer uses a direct comparison between two unlike things and to highlight the qualities that they have in common. Now I just have to decide which one it is. Now in this, I see that Steinbeck has used the words as quietly as little gray sculpted stones. So I know that a metaphor does not use like or as, and a simile does use like or as. So I know I have a simile here. So now that I've identified the literary device, I'm going to remind myself, how do I annotate that literary device? So I'm just going to draw a line here so I don't get myself confused with that little note that I wrote for myself. And I'm going to take this highlight and I'm going to draw a line and an arrow so I know exactly where I am. So the first thing I need to do is highlight the text that contains the literary device. I did that. And then I need to write the code LD. So I did that. And this is my second literary device. I'm just going to number that so I can be sure I'm doing everything I need to be doing. So it's a literary device. And then I checked my blue sheet and I know that this is a simile. And then so I've identified which literary device it is. Now I'm on to number 3. I'm explaining why the text meets the definition. So number 3, I would put Steinbeck is comparing, my lights in the room just went off, just 1 second. Comparing two unlike things, which are stones and rabbits. stones and rabbits using as. Okay, so I did that. Now I have to do the hard part, which is explain how the author's use of the literary device enhances the text. Okay, so I'm going to put a 4 here because I'm doing the harder part here. I'm going to say that Steinbeck, first of all, the third sentence of the story, he wants to call attention to the rabbits by using a literary device. So rabbits seem like they're going to be important to this story because it's the first thing he mentioned aside from describing the scene. So rabbits are really important, but he wants to characterize those rabbits. He could have said that the rabbits sat as quietly as zombies, right? Or as quietly as they were in a cemetery, right? That would make it sound like the rabbits were kind of spooky, but he didn't. He said that they sat as quietly as little gray sculptured stones. So it's almost as if somebody has lovingly made these rabbits, like you would sculpt stone. So I would say that he's trying to use the simile to help the reader visualize the cute and lovely nature of the rabbits, since sculpted stone is made with care. It seems like the writer wants the reader to also have a great care for rabbits too. Okay, so we've defined how the use of this simile has enhanced the text somehow. Okay, so let's go to find our third literary device. We have our first one, we have our second one, all we need is one more. Okay, so our third one we have, and then from the direction of the state highway came the sound of footsteps on crisp sycamore leaves. Well, this word already makes me think that we're dealing with some sort of sound, and we know that imagery evokes one or more of the 5 senses, and I know that one of the 5 senses is right here. So I know I'm looking at Steinbeck describing a sound. So I know that the sound is, I know the direction the sound is coming from, and then I know that it's the sound of footsteps on crisp sycamore leaves. So we're not just saying the sound of footsteps, he's telling me how those footsteps actually sound. We all know what it sounds like to have the sound of stepping on crisp leaves that have fallen to the ground, right? So that's sound imagery. He's helping us know what this sounds like. There's the state highway right there, and the footsteps are coming from that direction, and they sound, you can hear those footsteps because the footsteps are falling on crisp sycamore leaves, okay? So I'm gonna highlight that. From the direction of the highway came the sound of footsteps on crisp sycamore leaves. I'm going to draw a line here just so we don't get confused about what annotation goes where, but then I'm going to take this highlight and I'm going to draw an arrow to here so I know where I'm at. And I know that we are dealing with sound imagery, the vivid language an author uses to describe what a person, place, or thing sounds like, okay? So now we're going to use these 4 steps to annotate this literary device. So first it's asking me to highlight the text, which I did, and then use the code. So this is LD, and this is going to be my third one. So I'm using the code LD for literary device, and then I'm saying what literary device it was. That's number 2. The literary device that I found is sound imagery. Lovely. And now I need to do the third thing, which is to explain why this text meets the definition of the selected literary device. So Steinbeck is using vivid, descriptive language to help the reader understand what the footsteps sound like. Okay, so that's number 3. And number 4, this is the hard one, the higher level thinking one. Number 4 asks me to explain how the author's use of that literary device or that sound imagery enhances the text. So here's what I think, right? He's not just painting a picture in our mind, right? He's telling us a few things. He's saying that people are approaching. That's important to know because we've only talked about what the setting and the rabbits look like. Now we're coming up on describing people, so that's interesting. We know where the sound is coming from, but here's the important information that the footsteps, that's the sound of footsteps on crisp sycamore leaves. Crisp sycamore leaves is lovely imagery because there's only one time a year when when leaves are on the ground, you know, after and during winter, the leaves are on the ground, but they're all soggy and wet and brown. There's only one time a year when you step on a leaf that's on the ground and it's crispy, right? So that, we also know that it's a hot day, but there's a little bit of wind. And we also know that there's crisp leaves on the ground. So we're getting a picture that there's footsteps, yes, but the footsteps are at a specific time of year. It's still hot outside, but it's a little bit windy, and there are crisp leaves on the ground, which makes me think it's early fall. So he's helping me understand the setting a little more and what the setting sounds like. So I can say here that, let's see, this use of sound imagery not only describes the sound, but it also tells the reader in a creative way that this story is taking place, or at least starting, in early fall. Okay? And we know that early fall is harvest time. And we know that this story is about migrant workers who their main job is farming. So this is the perfect time for us to read a story about migrant workers, is the time when the migrant workers are harvesting, right? So I have found 3 literary devices. There are a lot more literary devices in here. I've found 3 and I don't need to find any more. Okay, so I've done the literary devices. Now let's move on to the 3 other annotations. So the 3 other annotations, we can put our literary device list aside because we did that. We're going to move on to the 3 other annotations, which are here below our literary device directions. So the other annotations are these annotations. So we need to find 3 of these, any 3 of your choice, any 3 of your choice. All you have to do is follow the directions here for whatever annotation you choose. Make sure you're following all of them. So let me read further on. So I have, they had walked, so we know 2 men are coming, right? And we know that these 2 men walked in single file down the path. Now that's interesting to me because if you're walking with somebody and nobody else is around, why wouldn't you walk next to them? It's interesting. I'm going to come back to that. And even in the open, one stayed behind the other. So there's room for them to walk next to each other, but they don't. One stayed behind the other. I'm going to come back to that because that's really interesting. Both were dressed in denim trousers and in denim coats with brass buttons. Sounds like they're not dressed for a party, they're dressed for work in denim trousers and denim coats. Both wore black, shapeless hats, and both carried light blanket rolls slung over their shoulders. So we're saying what they both looked like. So we're talking about, we're comparing here. We're saying what these two men have in common, right? We're comparing those, but also now we're going to go to describing each man separately. So the first man was small, quick, dark of face, restless eyes, and sharp, strong features. That's interesting. So I automatically have a picture of this small, strong-featured, restless-looking man, right? Every part of him was defined. Small, strong hands, slender arms, so he's slender, and a thin, bony nose. So this part, I know, is describing man number 1. That's really interesting because that's imagery. That is sight imagery for how this man looks, right? But imagery is a literary device. I don't need to know about that. All I need to know is this is man number 1. That's interesting, okay? So if they're both wearing the same clothes, maybe they're both similar. Let's read on. Behind him, and that's really interesting because we're remembering that they're walking single file. So the first man is in front, and then this second man is walking behind him. That's interesting. So behind him walked his opposite. So that's interesting. When I see the word opposite, already I'm thinking that I'm looking at a contrast. That's interesting. So now we have a huge man. So this guy was small. This guy's huge. They have a shapeless face, which is the exact opposite of a thin and bony face with sharp features, strong features. And large pale eyes and wide sloping shoulders. So this guy has wide sloping shoulders, so he's got to be strong if he has wide shoulders. And this guy has small, strong hands and slender arms. So we have slender versus wide and shapeless versus bony. And he walked heavily, dragging his feet a little. That's interesting. Why is he dragging his feet? The way a bear drags his paws. So that is a literary device, but we've already got our 3. And his arms did not swing at his sides, but hung loosely. Here's my thing. Normally, so this is how we described man number 2. And they really are, just as Steinbeck said, they are opposites, right? So man number 2 is in the back, and he's the opposite of man number 1. So there's a lot of things in here that I find interesting, but in terms of these annotation codes, I'm looking at this contrast and contradictions. And so I think that that's going to be my annotation because these two men are super different, and I'm going to talk about why Steinbeck would do that. So the first thing I need to do for this contrast and contradiction is highlight the text. So it's basically this whole text that I'm using as a contrast and contradiction, so I kind of just outlined it. And then I'm supposed to write the code C and C by it. So I'm going to write an arrow here to my C and C code. This is my first other annotation. So that's my C and C code. And so now I'm on number 2. It says, explain your thoughts about what you expected versus what you thought, right? And so I'm going to do number 2. I'm going to explain, and I'm going to say here that, let's see, even though these two men are together, they seem totally opposite and contrasting. So that's my first one. And now I say, explain how the author's use of this contradiction enhances the text. So the author clearly wants us to notice, right? So here's number 4. Clearly wants us to notice right away how totally different these two men are. And then we can say it's clear that these differences are very noticeable and very significant. Okay, so that is my first other annotation. I need 2 more. So one thing that's interesting to me, and it's making me wonder why, is the fact that one guy is walking in front of the other even though there's room for them to walk side by side. I don't know why. So first we're going to highlight or circle that text and write the code IW by it. And then we're going to explain in detail why and what about this text makes me wonder. Okay, so let me say, so they're walking single file. I'm going to put a little arrow here and I'm going to say, I wonder. And this is my second annotation there. So I wonder, so that's number 1. And then for number 2, I'm just going to say, I wonder why they are walking like this. The bigger person would usually be in front as a leader, but in this case, the smaller person is leading. I wonder if this detail tells the reader something very important about these 2 men. Okay, so that's my second other annotation. I did an I wonder. And now my third one, here's the thing. This is the part that is interesting to me at the bottom here. So usually you would think that if there's 2 men, the bigger man, if one is going to be the leader and walk in front, it would probably be the bigger man. But in this case, it's the other way around. And here's why I'm realizing I had a little bit of a light bulb moment here. It's this big, even though this second man is bigger and he's clearly stronger, he is heavily dragging his feet a little. The way a bear drags his paws. It's interesting. Why is he choosing to describe this man by comparing it to an animal? It's interesting. And then this man, the big man's arms did not swing at his sides. That would be what you would normally do when you were walking. So he's not doing what's normal, but actually his arms hung loosely by his side. Now, I don't know the answer to this, but, well, I do, but it's making me realize that this reason, this man is walking heavily and dragging his feet. It makes me feel like he's slow. So why would the slower one be the leader? It's the faster, scrappier guy that's the leader. So if the larger guy is in the back, it's probably because something's going on with him. If he's dragging his feet, is he tired? Is he sick? Is he just that way? I don't know the answer to that, but it really makes me wonder. But I definitely have a light bulb moment that I was wondering why the smaller guy was leading out, but my light bulb moment is that I realized that the reason the bigger guy is in the back is because something's going on with him. I don't know what that something is, but he's definitely slow, and he's dragging his feet, and he's not walking as one would normally walk. So something's going on there. So for the light bulb moment, I need to highlight or circle that the text gave me that light bulb moment and put the code by it. And then number 2, I need to explain my thoughts about that light bulb moment. And then I need to explain how this light bulb moment enhances my understanding of the characters, the story, and or society. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is draw a line to where I'm annotating, and I'm going to put an LB because that's my light bulb moment. I'm also going to say that this is my third other annotation. And then I'm going to say, let's see, I'm going to say at first, I wondered why the small one was leading in front, but this line makes me realize that the big guy is in back because something is slowing him down. And so the fourth part of that is just explaining how that enhances. I would put this line enhances the text because it gives the reader a heads up that something big and maybe bad is going on with the big guy. That seems like it will be important. Okay, so that's my third annotation, my third other annotation. So what we're looking at now is a completed annotation page, but we're not all the way done. So if I turn the page over, it says that I need to make sure to grade myself before I turn this in. So I'm going to go through this rubric and double check, how have I done? So do I have 3 or more literary devices that are accurately identified? I think I do. Have I clearly explained why the text fits the definition of each literary device? Let's see, that's number 3 on this list. So I have number 3 here. I've explained it for this one. I've explained it for this one. And I've explained it for this one. And I think my explanation is pretty thorough. So I did that. And then the student has also insightfully explained how the author's use of each literary device enhances the text. So that was number 4 on this literary device list, this annotation list. So I did a number 4 for this one, and I think it was insightful. I did a number 4 for this one. I think that's insightful. And I did a number 4 for this one. I think that's insightful too. So I did all 3 of these things, and I think I did them well. So I think I earned a 4 on that. So then the next part of the rubric is about those other 3 annotations. So 3 or more additional annotations are presented. I did that. The annotations insightfully include all the components listed on the handout. Okay, so all the components listed on the handout means that for my contrast and contradiction, I did number 1, I did number 2, and I did number 3. I think I did them well. And then for my light bulb moment, I did each of these things. I think I did them well. And then for my I wonder moment, I did these 2 things, and I think I did them well also. So I've done everything that the rubric asked for. I think I got a 4 in both areas on this. So I think I'm going to get a 4 on this whole thing. We'll see. But this is what your annotation should look like. Don't forget to put your name and your period. My period's all of them, right? And you can turn it in like this. So as you can see, the annotation looks a little bit messy, right? But as long as your handwriting is clear, I'll be able to read it. But what I really am wanting you to do with these assignments is just engage with the text on a very specific level. Take a look at Steinbeck's very clear and artistic choices just in a few lines. Now, you don't have to do this for the whole book, just for a portion of the book that I select. If you find other stuff within the book too, you can highlight it and write a note in the margin as well. But the whole point is to take a look, because this isn't an English class, it's an English language arts class. It's for you to look at the artistry of Steinbeck's writing and his language and start to dissect the artistry and then analyze that artistry with understanding why he used that artistry to enhance his writing and enhance the effect that it has for you as you are reading his words. All right, thanks so much for watching.